Good morning once again. It's lovely to be back here to host yet another wonderful and exciting session. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you the session which is titled Role of Coaching in Supporting Crisis Leadership. A little bit of context about this session. Crisis has been a part of our human existence and growth story. The world has seen innumerable times of crisis, and the last 1.5 years has been our most real collective crisis experienced as a humanity together. Nurturing leadership capabilities to deal with crises has been equally important. With the pandemic striking, leaders now more than ever need to summon up never before types of mindsets, skill sets, and emotional intelligence to cope with the resulting unprecedented times. This powerful session, featuring two leaders who have embodied crisis leadership, will present a great learning opportunity to all of us. As they share their experience and perspectives, the session will allow us to explore the role of coaching leaders to model crisis handling aptitudes and competences. I now present to you our first speaker, Captain Raghuraman. Raghu is the founding CEO NatGrid, President Reliance Industries, distinguished fellow ORF, and author. His unique career profile has enabled him to learn, practice, and teach first principles of organizational dynamics, strategy, transformations, and the mindset shift that is needed to lead in a complex and ever-changing world. He has operated in distinctively different environments of leadership: the authoritarian style within the armed forces, an incentive driven style predominant in corporates such as Mahindra and Reliance Industries, and the procedure driven bureaucratic style in the government. He has founded and led companies as well as complex global JVs. Raghu's intense exposure to working in large enterprises means he understands what it takes to bring about transformations. His concepts, writings, and sessions on the subjects of leadership, strategy, and entrepreneurship are sought after to trigger thought leadership and influence doctrine shaping. He has been a strategic advisor to both national and global level leaders. Raghu is the author of the bestseller Every Man's War, which has been endorsed by business and government leaders alike. Over to you, Captain Raghuraman.
Thank you, Vijay. That's a very, very kind and comprehensive introduction. I am conscious of the fact that I am speaking to a lot of coaches here, and by definition, coaches have had experiences which are probably more diverse than actual practitioners also. And many of the coaches, I'm sure, would have been practitioners who have taken up to coaching. I have a short presentation that I wanted to share with you, and this is more so that I don't miss out on any thoughts that I wanted to put forth in this context. We were actually discussing about this session a couple of days ago, and when we were talking about it, we said that is crisis leadership a special kind of a quality that leaders require, or do you have leaders who can be classified into two categories? One category is leaders who can lead during non-crisis times very well, but during crisis times they can't lead well? Or do you assume that leading in a crisis is part of the leadership toolkit? So I usually don't look at leadership only as in the classical sense that you have to be a senior person or you have to be a CEO or an SBU head or a president to be a leader. I think all of us are leaders in our own ways, even an individual contributor. A father is a leader in a family, a mother is a leader in the family. We are brothers, sisters, sons. So we have many roles of leadership. So what I would like to do is in this 20 odd minutes, first set a context in terms of how I think the world is reshaping right now. And to do that, I'm going to use a presentation. And this presentation is more for my reference rather than, 1 second, let me just tackle, yeah. So hopefully you'll be able to see a yellow screen in front of you. right now, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about: coaching in a ruptured world. And why do I call it a ruptured world? We would have heard of this phrase called the VUCA world until now. I think the VUCA has now transformed into the ruptured world. And let me explain why. By the way, the rupt is the root of it's a Latin root which means to break. And that's why you have it in interrupt, or you have it in eruption, and here you have it in rupture as well. Now, the R stands for rapidity. The rapidity with which the world is changing, and I quote this anecdote, it's my favorite go-to anecdote to quote the rapidity factor, is that on the 8th of March last year, not this year, last year, 8th of March, I was in Goa with Infosys BPM. And Infosys had just crossed a BPM, had crossed $1 billion mark. And to celebrate that, they had called all their global leaders. All the global leaders were present in Goa. I mean, about 600 of them were there, except leaders from China and from Japan. And the CEO told me very proudly, all my leaders are here except from China and Japan. There's some viral fever going on there. Some sickness is going on there. That's why they have not come. Now, that was the 8th of March, and within 10 working days, a crisis which was at the other end of the world, it came and changed our lives completely and forever. And we can see that. Uncertainty was there earlier also, but now the uncertainty, the degree of uncertainty is so high that if you're asked, like if I ask you today, are you free for dinner day after tomorrow? You might be able to give me an answer in a yes or a no. If I ask you the same question for 10 days from now, chances are you will be uncertain, because 10 days from now, your vacation planning, your long leave planning, all of those things have gone for a six, because you have no idea. Lockdown will come, third wave will come, this will happen, that will happen, travel restrictions. Paradoxical is that increasingly in a crisis, this is true for any crisis, especially this one, leaders will be required to take decisions between one wrong and another wrong. It won't be a decision between a right and a wrong. Those are easy decisions. More and more tougher decisions they will have to take will be between one wrong and another wrong. And no matter what decision they take, they will leave a certain part of their demography dissatisfied. So last year, Diwali, let's take an example. Diwali time, the government had not put down any restrictions in terms of, people thronging in the markets. And I'm sure your TV screens were full of it, Twitter feeds were full of it. Look at the people so irresponsible going out for these festivals and all of that. Now, the thing is that in a country where about 50 to 60% of sales, in some cases in MSMEs and SMEs, is actually done during the festival season. During those 1 month of festival season, that's when about 50% of the sales happen in a year when otherwise the MSMEs and the SMEs have been ravaged by COVID. If you don't allow that window also for them to make a living, then more people will be dying of hunger than they'll be dying of COVID. So this is like a paradoxical decision that decision makers will have to take, which will seem a bad decision to a certain part of their demography. And lastly, the world is going to be a very tangled place. It's not going to be organized in very convenient buckets of green, red, and amber. A very easy example to illustrate it is that in the beginning of this pandemic, I was part of a committee that was set up to decide what will be essential services. And of course, unanimously, everyone agreed that essential services, communications is essential services, because without communication, you can't do anything. You can't even do governance. But if communication is essential services, then the 4 lakh towers in our country, which provide mobile tower communication, they become essential services. Half these towers are powered by diesel generators. So diesel generators, the diesel supply chain, they become essential services. These towers have radio modems and routers in them, which have to be adjusted very frequently. So the engineers who will climb up to do that, they become essential services. Most of these engineers stay in chamris and chawls and paying guest accommodations and hostels, so they become essential services. And most of them eat out of cafeterias and dabba services, and they become essential services. So you suddenly realize life does not move in a very convenient quarantine zones. Life moves through everything. And of course, we have to understand that the world has changed dramatically with 1 degree of separation, and in some unfortunate cases with 0 degree of separation. Every family has had the loss of a loved one, or has gone through major trauma, has had loss of finance, has had major losses. And you can see that from the general, sort of financial state of families and the environment. So the world has changed dramatically. And I'm stressing on this fact for a reason. The world has changed so dramatically that in many cases the change is not visible to us. I'll explain that with a metaphor. So imagine there is the ship which is harbored, anchored in a harbor in the sea, and imagine that the tide goes down during low tide. The tide goes down by a foot every 1 hour. Every hour the tide goes down by a foot, and on the side of this ship there is a ladder with which you climb up the ship, and that ladder has got rungs which are 1 foot apart. So the question is that how many hours will it take for 3 rungs of the ladder to become uncovered if the water is receding at 1 foot per hour? And the intuitive answer might be 3 hours, because 3 hours, 1 hour, water comes down, and 3 rungs, 3 hours. But the real answer is that when the sea comes down, the ship also comes down. The tide comes down, the ship also comes down with the tide. The ship doesn't stay in that same place. So if you are looking at some marker of normalcy, like your ladder, that'll seem to be at the same place. So I'm still working. Instead of doing my physical work, I'm mostly doing online. Now meetings are held, like this particular conference. In another world, they would have been in the real world, talking to each other. You would be meeting former colleagues, you will be interacting with all of them. Now the most you can go to a chat room and maybe send an emoji, if at all. So in many ways the world has transformed dramatically, and that leads me to the next point, that one of the first principles during a paradigm shift, I don't look at this as a crisis, I look at this as a paradigm shift. Every crisis is an opportunity, it's a paradigm shift. We should not start mistaking the map for the actual territory. What do I mean by that? You all recognize this map. I'm sure many of you us would have used it also. It's the London Tube map, which is kind of the forerunner of every metro map in the world. And this is a great map to navigate inside the tube. You can actually plan a journey with literally 2 to 3 minutes of train changing time, and it's brilliant. But if you try to use this map outside the tube, it will be a disaster. Yes, general line of direction will be more or less the same. Wembley will still be north of, say, Piccadilly Circus. But if you try to use this map to navigate the real world, it will be a disaster. Similarly, many of the maps that our organizations have, that our leaders have, that our leadership frameworks have, they are actually hopelessly outdated. They were outdated even before the pandemic. But now with the I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, there is this whole alpha leaders persona, that a role model leader should be that alpha leader who knows all the answers, who can navigate, who's like a rock and during any crisis. But that's not true. That's a myth. An alpha leader actually who thinks that she or he knows a lot of stuff may be a disaster in a paradigm shift, because they will keep trying to navigate their world with the tube map, because that's the map that they understand. Similarly, the impact that mental health and stress, and more importantly morale, has had on individuals, it's uncalculable. I don't think organizations have even grasped their sort of hands around the kind of damage, how many feet the tide has gone down. They have not been able to grasp the damage, because they're looking at the ladder and trying to see whether the ladder is getting uncovered. Ladder will never get uncovered, because the entire world has become stressed and depressed to a certain extent. And you can actually see that despite the fact that most of us, I'm assuming, are in the knowledge industry, despite that, I mean, coaches are in the knowledge industry, even if you may be coaching someone who may be in the manufacturing or the industrial industry, but your job or your responsibility as a coach is the knowledge industry. Even now, knowledge industry is still measured by units of measurement of time and material. I mean, it's as simple. People still measure the presence of an individual, how many hours, 8 ghanta kaam kiya ki nahi kiya, punch in, punch out, timesheet. That's the kind of measurement mechanisms that we are still using. So in many cases, our maps are outdated already. And there are a lot of unrealistic expectations. I mean, we have seen the entire work from home scenario, where families have had to convert their homes into workspaces, find places to work, and the machines and the ambience and the noise, and we see every aspect of sort of social stability, whether it's divorce rates or domestic violence or just fights that are breaking out. They are much more. And I'm always found this very fascinating, that whenever we talk about an employee and a leader, and we think of a leader in an abstract way. We think that as if, so for example, if we take the picture on the right hand side, of course these pictures, they all look very pretty and nice, because they are taken from the web, but in real life, you know how harangued and how harassed they will look. And if you visualize that there is an employee who is coming to work, a leader who is coming to work, and just outside the gate of your office, that person gets involved in a road rage incident with somebody who's parked the car or something, and that individual enters with that road rage into the organization, and there is this belief in our organization that as soon as the person enters, he or she will become an empathetic leader. How did that work? I mean, life doesn't work like that. So I think this entire environment where we have had stress, where we have had a fair degree of strain, it is having an impact on the ability of leaders to lead. Now, the second aspect, which I think is really, really important for us to understand, is that many of the tools of leadership that we had at our disposal have been taken away from us. I'll give you an example. In the real world, suppose I'm looking at the briefing of my team, and let's say my North Zone head is giving his briefing. I'm not looking only at his face. I'm looking at the face of the South Zone head. I'm looking at the face of the CFO. I'm noticing a youngster in the corner who's champing on the bit to say something, but he's hesitant. And I have many tools at my disposal. I can turn around and say suddenly, okay, I want to listen to somebody who's not spoken before. Yes, you. Which department are you from? Why don't you speak up and tell me what's on you? I have methods of drawing people into a conversation. I have a method of rebuking somebody during a presentation and later on putting a hand over his shoulder and saying, hey, listen, don't give these kind of numbers, and assuaging that. All these tools have been taken away from us. So 18-lane traffic, which used to go, has now been compressed into a small single channel through which all communication is happening. And we are assuming that whatever used to work in the real world will work over here in the virtual world to some degree of efficiency. It doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. There are certain aspects of leadership that cannot be transferred from one world to the other world in totality or even partially. Let me give you an example. One of the 5 key elements of any good performing team, of course, the 5 elements would be trust, and in some shape and form, these are the 5 key traits. You may have a different vocabulary for it, but you need trust, you need competence in the team members, you need respect amongst the team members for each other's competence, and you need a conflict resolution mechanism, and you need very strong communication to make all of this tie in together. Now, let's take a simple element like trust. Now, trust has 2 components. One is called cognitive trust and the other is emotive. Let's not get into jargon. Cognitive trust is what you can write in your CV. You can say, I did this, I was a Fannek, I was a CEO here, I put up this business, 5,000 crores, I did blah, 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 I'm a doctor, I'm MD from London. All of these are cognitive things that can go into your CV or into your JD. Emotive trust is what you experience. Emotive trust is your assessment that this is a good doctor. This is an empathetic person. He has fire in the belly. There is chemistry. There are good vibes. These are all emotive trust. You can't put, I have good vibes in my CV, or I have good chemistry or fire in the belly. There is no way to measure that in an objective sense. Now, you can communicate cognitive trust aspects on email and on videos and all of that, but emotive trust is something. Now, so if we are in the business of coaching where emotive trust is very, very critical. You can't really coach a person unless the person has some degree of trust in you. It may not be complete trust, but trust at least to the extent of listening to your advice. Now, that becomes a very big challenge in the virtual world. And we see a lot of leaders in the real world who are trying to take whatever they used to do in the real world and they're lifting and shifting it into the virtual world. And then you need to ask yourself a fundamental question that it's been 18 months since the pandemic began. And how many sessions do you recollect where the speaker was looking into your eyes while speaking, like I'm looking at you? But I am not looking into your eyes. I'm looking at the camera. If I looked into the eyes, this is what it will look like. So if I look at your face, this is what you're going to see. And you're going to, your logical brain will tell you that I'm looking at you. But your emotive brain will tell you that I'm not interested. Why? Because for 20 years, you've been hard-coded that anyone who is looking like this at you in a meeting is really not interested in you, is interested in their phone or the document or whatever else is distracting them. Now, we need to go down to that level of training ourselves, retraining ourselves for the new world, where even this aspect of looking at the camera while speaking is something that has to be retaught, using all hand gestures to illustrate a point, to emphasize body language, which would otherwise happen in a full stage, has now to be converted into this tiny window. I'm just giving this as a tactical, don't take it literally, but I'm giving it as a tactical example of how the method with which we used to work needs to change dramatically during a crisis environment, and especially in an environment where communication has been very, very reduced and compressed. My last point is that if you want to create innovation and an ambience of creativity, which is absolutely essential during a crisis, because in a crisis you are still looking for your way out, and the way to look for a way out is to discover, is to prototype, is to attempt new things. And to do that, you need a psychologically safe environment. I know we don't have the time for it right now, but this is, those of you have not heard of this experiment, I'm sure with coaches, most of you would have heard of this marshmallow tower. Those of you who haven't heard of it, I'll give you a very quick recap, but please go to YouTube and you'll see hundreds of videos explaining that there. In this, basically what happens is a group of people are given some sticks, spaghetti sticks, and they have to create a tower as high as possible, and on top they have to put a marshmallow, and that's why it's called the marshmallow tower. And they're given some duct tape to tie up this structure together. And this experiment has been tried across different demographies. It's been tried with civil servants, with MBA interns, with doctors, engineers, kindergarten kids, fighters, pilots, everything. And some amazing results have been found. They found that the group that usually beats everyone else hands down is actually the kindergarten kids. Now, for that, the organizational experts have come up with a very interesting theory. I mean, it's a logical theory. It says that whenever a group of people is given a task, a large part of their energy goes in what is called status management. They typically divide themselves into sub-teams and say, okay, you look after the sticks, I will look after the tape, and we will design and this, and they'll take the big task and allocate it into smaller pieces. But the allocation is not necessarily happening with expertise. It's happening also with ego. That does he get the bigger piece? Do I get the smaller piece? Do I have a significant task? Will I get credit for it? A lot of that energy in the team goes into what is called status management. And this happens in a psychologically unsafe environment, where every time a person says something, then they check to look how the boss is accepting that statement. Is it in alignment? Is it in line? Those kind of organizations will die very quickly. Those kind of leaders will also die very quickly, because they will not have an ambience where there's a lot of creativity and innovation happening. So I have seen many organizations write and talk and shout from the rooftop that we are a creative organization, we are by putting it on the walls and vision statement, mission statement, core values, the company doesn't become innovative. It becomes innovative by creating an environment of dissent, an environment of alternate views, an environment of rigor for every idea, questioning it from different sides. That, to my mind, requires a psychologically safe environment. So we are going through a crisis right now. There's no debate on that. It's also a paradigm shift. And I want to tell you this story about the end of the Second World War, when the propeller planes, they were giving way to jet planes. Now, propeller planes had a range of about hour and a half of flying, depending on the weapon's payload. They had a cruise range of about 500 miles. And they had, the pilots had to, sort of visually engage every target. They had to visually see the target before engaging it. And they had to think in seconds. After all, they're fighter pilots. They have to think in seconds. When the propeller planes gave way to the jet aircrafts, they did exactly, all air forces did exactly what corporates would do. They took their existing pilots, they gave them 2 weeks of familiarization training, or whatever, 6 months of training, what they call digital dexterity and all of that, and they put them in fighter jets. And it was a disaster, because many of the aces, when the plane would take off, the G-force would black them out. They couldn't even withstand the G-force. They were not physically. So many of the aces of the Second World War couldn't even take off in a jet aircraft. More importantly, a framework that was designed to think in seconds could not be adapted to think in milliseconds. You cannot take a 2 lakh Alto car and strip down the rear view mirrors and the music system and the airbag and make it into a 1 lakh nano. It doesn't work like that. You have to begin with a clean sheet of paper and reconstruct. So all our maps of how do we recruit, how much time does it take to recruit, how do we recruit on CVs anymore? Why won't organizations very quickly start changing their method of recruitment by telling their candidates to send a 3-minute video about yourself, send us a video CV? And why won't a skill which was considered to be, well, if you have it, it's nice, but not really important, which is addressing a camera, talking live in front of an audience of maybe hundreds of people, why wouldn't that become the norm tomorrow? So many ways in which the world will change are changes that will start ab initio, that will be from ground up. But the good news is, and this is one of my favorite books, I recommend you to read it. It's called Illusions, written by Richard Bach. In that, there's a very powerful sentence where he says, what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, master calls the butterfly. So at the end of any crisis, end of any paradigm shift, we have to remember one thing, that like a knife is used to cut vegetables. You can cut tomatoes with it, potatoes, cut butter with it, but a knife is not sharpened by cutting butter. You can cut as many onions as you want, but that will not sharpen the knife. That will only dull the knife. So in great times, if leaders are running well, if order books are getting full and customers are giving repeat orders and there is no attrition and all of that, then an Excel sheet can run the organization. Leadership, I think, is tested only during crises, and it's only during crises that leadership or leaders get a chance to hone their leadership skills. So it's like that stone on which you sharpen a knife. And yes, when you sharpen a knife, there is heat, there is sparks, there is a lot of friction, but that is what sharpens the knife. So with that, I come to the end of my sort of conversation with you. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions at the end of the session by Dr. Radha. Thank you very much, Vijaya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raghu. Absolutely nuggets out there. And I was debating between making notes and just zoning in and listening to you. The one thing that I am very conscious about now, I'm looking at my camera, but my brain is sort of telling me I need to look at you. So this is a moment, right, where you're debated. So thank you for all those gems you put out there. And I have a feeling already we might be extending this Q&A a little bit, but more on that in a bit. I'm going to, at this juncture, take the opportunity of introducing Dr. Jay Radhik Krishnan, who's our second speaker here. I must say, first of all, Dr. Radhik Krishnan, a big thanks for making your time here to be in our conclave, because I know your schedule, because you being a frontline leader in this time of the pandemic is so unpredictable. So my gratitude on behalf of everyone here that you're here today. That being said, I know you wanted me to read out a very short bio or none at all, but I will be doing terrible disservice if I don't at least say a few things from the kind of leader that you are. Dr. Jay Radhik Krishnan is an IAS officer, All India 7th rank from Tamil Nadu Kada, and he has held several positions in the state government and is presently Principal Secretary to Government, Health and Family Welfare Department. Between 2009 and 12, he joined the UNDP on deputation from the government as its Assistant Country Director and was head of the Disaster Management Unit. He has served as Commissioner, Relief Administration and Disaster Management and Mitigation of the state from October 2019 till June 2020, and since been reappointed as Principal Secretary Health to lead the COVID response. Many of us here, based in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, know about the stellar work that he's been leading to keep all of us safe. He has also been serving as the Nodal Officer for Chennai COVID response since May 2020. He's a leader with rich disaster management and mitigation experience, leading the efforts in managing some of the worst disasters which have struck Tamil Nadu in recent times, including tsunami rescue, relief and rehabilitation, and tackling the aftermath of the horrific Kumbakonam school fire tragedy. With that brief introduction, Dr. Jay Radhik Krishnan, we are eagerly awaiting your talk on the way you embody crisis leadership and to share your experiences with us.
Thank you, Madam Vijayalakshmi, and again, welcome to all those who have joined this, and especially after such a nice session by Captain Raghuraman. It's fairly tough to go behind him to give an act. It was very, very informative. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for giving an opportunity to us to share this kind of real-time crisis. Today, when you talk of coaching for growth or something like that, this is a time where these are some of the crises which Madam as Vijayalakshmi has just enumerated, is something which we would never want somebody else to go through, or never want all of us. When you talk about Kumbakonam fire tragedy, you imagine a set of students going, children being sent to school. then come back as charred bodies. When you talk of tsunami, and especially Nagapattinam, I was in the neighboring district of Tanjavur. You look at a place where 6,000 people have died just because of one wave, and on a holiday, it was a Sunday, where people were not aware of what a tsunami is. Most of us in India were not aware, because the earthquake happened at 6:30 in the morning. We had enough time, but the systems were not there to alert about a possible tsunami. Came like with the force of a airplane and hit the coast when everybody was doing their purchases after the rich haul of fishes in the coast. 6,000 people died. Not only that, most of the habitations were inundated. Working people were affected. And second, I brought some 32 vehicles from Tanjavur. All the petrol bunks were full of salt water. So that's the kind of all-round challenges we face. But what I admired during all this period is the resilience of people to get over this crisis. So that is where I would like to mention today the challenge of a crisis, which again is a topic. And ultimately, I'll come with the importance of coaching. Now, look at this pandemic. 2 days back, I was looking through one of my talks in 2013, where I talked about zoonotic diseases and the need for One Health program, where there was a passing mention about the challenges of severe acute respiratory SARS, passing mention of MERS, and we talked about Nipah. And prophetically, in 2019, we had this challenge and found it very difficult to handle. And even now, every day, it is throwing surprises. So when you talk of leadership and a crisis, we need to understand that same thing happened. We had Ebola with almost 90% mortality. There were effective systems which ensured that, it doesn't go beyond Congo. Even now, I think last week also there was an outbreak. Similarly, we had Zika. Even recently, Zika resurfaced in Kerala. But there are effective systems to handle it. Then routinely, we have got this endemic of, dengue, which became an endemic. Was a major crisis during several years. Swine flu started as a pandemic, became a seasonal thing. What was the challenge, and how do at the leadership level we respond? The challenge of this particular disease was, despite corona being common, the other strains, nobody imagined. Everybody thought, just like SARS or MERS, this will probably also go away. But starting from one wet market to one town, today it is present in all over the world, and it is coming in new things. So what were the challenges? Always these kind of crises, what we do, we have certain planned approaches. Planned approaches is that, WHO can declare it a thing of concern, then it declare it as emergency, public health emergency. We can declare it under Epidemic Act. These are all certain planned approaches. What were the challenges? Then, of course, we have certain immediate reactions. So initially, I remember that, in a day, let us have 1 day lockdown. Then only it started striking that, it's so difficult once it starts spreading. So ultimately, it went on March 25th, I remember, generalized lockdown. We announced it a day earlier, some of the states, but ultimately it became generalized lockdown. Then it started throwing up challenges. That time I was a relief commissioner looking after various collectors. So the biggest challenges was people were stuck. Migrant labor was a challenge. Routine income was a challenge. Routine activity was a challenge. Continuous process industries, how to leave them alone was a challenge. How to run essential services was a challenge. And the biggest challenge of them all, considering the disease itself was a new disease and there was all-round scare about it, how to run hospitals was a challenge. Most of the private hospitals had shut shop, or they were not aware. Then the other challenge was Tamil Nadu. I'm just giving you the context. Tamil Nadu is one of the better equipped states. And we had 7 RT-PCR centers in Tamil Nadu for swine flu and 14 in private. And for handling this particular crisis, we started with one lab, King Institute, where we could run 10 samples and we had 10 beds. The challenge is today we have crossed number of cases as a huge number we have crossed. And today the cases are, when you look at the world, or when you look at Tamil Nadu in particular, even if you leave the world, so far 26 lakh people in Tamil Nadu have tested positive. We have checked almost 4 crore samples. That is, and every day we get, one day it was in the peak wave 6,993, came down. Again today, as on date, 1,500. So these are the challenges. Then subsequently, the challenges, how did we all handle it? So of course, everybody talks of political leadership, whether it is the past chief minister or the present chief minister. They had to, as part of disaster, it became a state disaster management authority's prerogative to control everything. At the union government level, Home Ministry took charge, and the National Disaster Management Agency started giving directions through the Ministry of Home. Our first task was, on one side, to prevent entry of diseases. Subsequently, once diseases started entering, we had a barber coming in a train, and then this disease spreading to other places. But slowly, once the Vande Bharat mission came, others came, travel became more, the numbers started increasing. And we had the first peak in around August, if I'm correct, July, and the death peak after 15 days. That time the challenges were that we didn't even have proper medicines, at least no repurposed medicines. That is, no mixing up of medicines and giving is that. So we didn't have medicines, there was no vaccines. That is the kind of challenge which we all had, and the only effective was like our grandmother's approach of stay apart, wash your hands regularly and ensure that you are masked. So that is the kind of basic levels which we had to go, which continues to be our approach now. Subsequently, the challenge of this disease has been people trying to take it very lightly. The moment things started coming down, people started celebration. They were tired of the lockdown approach. So then we had Dasara, we had Deepavali, we had Christmas, we had New Year, we had Pongal, we had Jallikattu. So everybody declared that nothing needs to be done. It is just like a common cold. Then it came back with a vengeance. And by that time, we already had the challenges of mutation. Everybody talks of leadership and approaches, planned approaches. Earlier, MERS and SARS died down without going to many countries. Here, it started mutating. So you have a number of mutants available now. It is not just one mutant. Several mutants are now going around the town, and the latest online is Delta. We already have been impacted by Delta. Delta Plus has also started surfacing, though it is limited to only 10 cases when we test. But majority, 75% is Delta. So this Delta, which had already come to India in October, started approaching the vulnerable people, because by that time we had forgotten the crowd behavior required for COVID-appropriate crowd behavior. It came back with a vengeance. And despite our, rapidly increasing health infrastructure in the first wave, managing it fairly decently, and controlling the death, we were hit by a tsunami, literally another tsunami in the month of March and onwards, April and May. The country's figure went up to 4 lakh cases a day. Tamil Nadu's figure in the middle of May was around 36,200 a day. And if you look at 10 days, we have to have a patient load of, in the peak period, it was 3.11 lakhs. And as leadership suffers from a crisis, we had prepared for one of the largest oxygen holding capacities. We have production of 400 kiloliters. Our consumption during peak had not crossed 250 KL. And suddenly, entire India was hit. India's production was 7,000 KL, and the production requirement went up to 10,000. So that was another crisis. Again, we had to ensure. Somebody asked us, we literally, whether you believe it or not, ship from Singapore started coming. Tankers started being airlifted by Indian Air Force from Sulur, Chennai, and Madurai to Jamshedpur, Kalinganagar, and all. And trains and containers started running every day. So every crisis also gave us an opportunity to tap areas where they were not they are adequately available to shift it. So these are some of. Then the next crisis is, during the entire period, medicine started evolving. Everything used to be an emergency authorization, whether it is remdesivir, whether it is tocilizumab, whether it is enoxaparin, which is allowed, but people were not knowing. prednisolone. So people started learning about it. So on one side, we have to, then even in May, despite rapid upgradation of infrastructure, the crisis came that in the first wave, nobody wanted ventilator, and even the ventilators were underused or not in use at all. And high flow nasal cannula, another equipment was used. And the entire second wave, the demand was not only for oxygen, but ventilator beds. So these are the kind of challenges we had to handle, plus the eternal challenge of economy was parallelly handled, which is being faced by everybody. I would not like to take too much of time, but I'm just giving you these kind of challenges. Look at the number of hospitals where everyone had to upgrade themselves. If it is oxygen requirement, everybody had to not only ensure that they get oxygen in time, but also adequate quantities. Medicines, remdesivir, we have seen people running helter-skelter waiting for remdesivir. So now everything is, when we thought everything is going on well, the post-corona complications also, all experts had guided, we were hit by the fungal infection, mucormycosis. Again, medicine is not available in the world at that moment. We have to start producing and getting. That was, so these are the kind of continuous crises we have been handling, not to say the kind of crisis which economists faced, people in work faced, people requiring treatment faced. I will end by saying that on all this, we all found that the team approach succeeded. Second is, we also had a challenge of non-communicable diseases getting ignored. Then what we realized is teams work. People with capacities should be brought in to work together as a team. And here I will end by saying that how does these all link up to coaching? Coaching is something where, we all can. Coach is not somebody who is going to just give you teaching material or give you guiding materials. Coach is a person who, when you are low, helps you, makes you understand, and he becomes a mentor and also ensures that the things get recorded. You are guided. What you tend to miss, you do. Now, how do we handle? See, when you handle these kind of, we handle these kind of crises. So we now have almost 287 labs. Our capacity to do RT-PCR testing has grown to 3.2 lakh. These are the opportunities of a crisis. Beds have increased, almost tenfold. Pediatric beds have increased. But now you will ask, sir, that means you are all very proud of what you have done. No. This is a crisis is something where we can be on one side happy about what we have been able to overcome and having weathered one part of a storm. But we have to be aware and be impatient of what is impending. A crisis makes you mature enough to understand that nobody can call it. We have to keep on trying to plan for what is unknown. That is the kind of challenges which we'll have. And these kind of challenges in a professional atmosphere is looked into in a very, very rudimentary way of a business continuity plan. But the plan is, nobody had planned for these kind of, I'm sure I have worked with UNDP. Business continuity plan was there. Many of our offices, we have continuity plans are there. But nobody, I'll end with another example of a crisis. Japan is known for one of the best crisis management mechanisms. But if you imagine March 11, 2011, if I am correct, it was first there was an earthquake, then it led to a tsunami. Due to the earthquake, there was a lot of fire accidents, current went out, tsunami hit the thing, and finally the roads and all the infrastructure got affected due to the earthquake. Finally, when they thought that, these are the only true things, they had the Fukushima disaster. So for a country as prepared as Japan, a disaster led to such a huge crisis. And the entire country, including WHO, if somebody claims that, we are aware, we have planned, we all need to admit that we were caught by surprises in COVID. Corona has taught everybody a lesson and continuously teaches a lesson to anybody who claims that, he has conquered it. So Corona is a pointer that in future, we have to look at One Health. We have to expand our horizon. We should not look at ourselves. Now, environment health, animal health, human health, all have started getting intertwined. Monkey fever, which was not known, reduced to being only in Kayasnor forest. has started spreading. Nipah and tick-borne illnesses, or for that matter, mosquito-borne illnesses. Why it is coming? Because of environment. Everything, when you talk of public health, it is a public's health. Public health, how it comes, starts from individual health. So these are medical challenges. I don't want to digress on it. But when I end with this coaching federation, I would request that every institution has problems. When you look at recession, none of the London School of Economists could predict 2007 recession. Similarly, nobody would have predicted the effect of corona on banking, effect of corona on people who have taken loans. Most of the industries depend on resources. Look at inputs. Entire our own medicines, we depended on active ingredients from China. This has rung a bell. So at the coaching level, they have the ability to look at it in 360 degree and ensure that, whatever be the field, whatever be the area, the coaching federation kind of training online exposes us to these kind of possibilities. And that is where I think the coaching for growth is a very important topic. We all should work and ensure that, whichever field we are, not look at in a rudimentary way as a business continuity plan or a crisis management plan, but look at it by looking beyond our agencies, looking at regulators, looking at problems created by such unplanned things, and planning and getting coached for the right approach in the future. Thank you.
Wow. I am so, thank you, Dr. Radhakrishnan. I am really feeling inspired because as listening to you, the message that you finally left, saying coaching, and this is what we spoke about yesterday, coaching is not just about one individual or a set of people. How can we all come collectively together, I think, for the betterment of society and for dealing with adversity, which today all of us have to come together to face. Thank you so much. And honestly, the narrative that you gave, I think each of us thought our lives were shaken up by the pandemic. I cannot even imagine what must have happened in your household or in your mind or in your system. And so while I open this out for question and answers for both yourself and Captain Raghu, I have one question I do want to start with. It's on my mind and I'm seeing it in the chat box. As leaders who are handling these kind of crises, as a leader who's handling it back to back to back, right? Your career seems to be dotted with these. What has helped you? What has helped you actually, what are the things in your life that has allowed you to show up as this kind of a leader?
See, very frankly, I'm telling you, of course, in civil services, though they train you up, the challenges when you, on the day Kumbakonam fire tragedy happened, it's so difficult to go and tell a parent that, your child has been charred to death or see the bodies. So that time, one thing which we similarly, tsunami was a natural tragedy. Again, this is a biological disaster. One, I believe that, we all should need to understand that in this kind of thing, leadership is not just commanding. We have to enter. When you look at Corona, a lot of people ask me that when you first went to Chennai coordination, first I saw that everybody had fear in his mind. There's no point in telling a doctor to go in if we don't go in. So we started our work in VR Pillai Street in a containment zone, along with people who are with COVID positive. Then the cutting edge people, the workers who wear a PP and work, or the municipal people, they started believing, no, they are not people who are just going to stay back and give orders, but they will be with us during the crisis. They will also be part of us. The messages started going in WhatsApp that no, officers are also like managing workers. They are also in the field. They are with us. They are facing the risk. Similarly, with regard to doctors, they needed somebody to also visit. And I make it a point that, at least if now may not be as much as the other, but definitely once a week, if not twice a week, I go to a COVID ward with adequate protection, because they are the people who are with patients. And we need to, see the challenges which they face. When you look at the beginning, they didn't have enough protection. So these are the challenges. But in all these crises, one thing I said, one, we need to understand it is a teamwork. Second is we as leaders have to also do certain very risky things, be part along with the risk and not stay away. People can see through and say that no, they are only coming during just for the sake of a photo op. A photo op will not behind many photos. 90% of the work behind the cameras is a real work with the cutting edge people. And believe me, I started by telling the same tsunami where in Akarapete almost 2,000 odd people had died. 1 year later, the same places, the same fish market was very vibrant despite so much of loss. That is the kind of resilience people have. So we just need to tap the resilience, and we have a duty towards such people. Similarly, with Corona, my biggest grievance, I will tell you, is also that, as many at the scientific level, much more needs to be done. We cannot go and keep on telling people that this is the thing. We have to challenge. That is what we discuss with various scientific communities. We have to quickly come up with much more sustainable. Of course, we need to salute the scientists for having come up with vaccination so quickly. But beyond vaccination, if we can get a proper kind of treatment module, more than what at present is there, where the deaths, the number, which is really scary, more than 30,000. The last big pandemic in Tamil Nadu during swine flu, a year death used to be 40 or 50. Dengue used to be within 100. But today, Corona is a totally different ballgame. This is where I think teamwork would be my final message. Teamwork, a selfless work, and not trying to push people, understand mental stress many of our own equal partners may be going through. Everybody. My own family became COVID positive, so I cannot simply say that they didn't have any stress. So, or we don't have. So we have to respect the stress which everybody else is going through who is in the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Radhakrishnan. And I hope, coaches, you're listening to that many of our crisis leaders need support too. And I think we should think about how we as coaches can really show up. Captain Raghu, a very associated question for you from Raj Dharmaraj, which is about Captain Raghu, while you can never prepare for the completely unexpected, what has worked for you in terms of handling with crisis on issues that totally come out of the blue?
Well, again, I think a better way to understand this would be a framework. So in the army, for example, we have a framework called battle drills, and which also is translatable into a corporate. At a soldier's level, a soldier is trained to be really good in battle drills. Battle drill means if there is a fire coming at you, you have to dash down, crawl, and return fire. As simple as that. If there is a client who is entering the showroom, how quickly do you convince the client that, or discern what the client wants, make the appropriate purchase? If you have got a decision which has got 8 pieces of information that you need and only 5 are there with you, how do you create a framework with which you can take a decision which is satisfactory but at the same time efficient? These are battle drills. The ability of a leader to take decisions with minimal information, the ability to take flexible decisions where you can cut losses, the ability of a leader to acknowledge that yes, that decision was wrong, I made a mistake, now I need to cut my losses and make another. These are traits that help in any crisis. What is a crisis? Let's look at it fundamentally. And I was giving you this example the other day. A crisis is a new set of circumstances that you have not encountered before, whose damage potential is very high. That's a crisis. So you are being asked to take a decision on an environment with pieces of information that may not be complete, and a situation in which you have no prior experience, and the consequences of your decision can have a very negative effect. This is in a rough sort of definition of crisis. Now, for a leader to operate in crisis, it is the exact contrary. You have to learn how to take decisions which can be taken and may be reversed in some cases, not all cases. In some cases, it can be reversed, or can be done in prototypes, or can be done in smaller segments, see the effect and then expand. Use those mechanisms to navigate in an uncertain world. But to my mind, as I keep saying, a good way to illustrate this same example, which I used a couple of days ago, is the difference between a cook and a chef. A cook learns leadership principles from a recipe, how to cook from a recipe. So if a certain ingredient of the recipe is missing, the cook does not know what to do. Whereas the chef learns the first principles of cooking. He learns or she learns what are the ingredients that go with each other. If this is not available, what can be used? This ingredient is being added to give, consistency to the broth. It is not being added for taste. So if the person knows that, knows the first principles, so I think it's every leader's responsibility to learn the first principles of leadership rather than recipes of leadership. Because if you have learned the first principles of leadership, no matter how the environment changes, you can change your toolkit accordingly.
Sure, I think that was something Dr. Radhakrishnan also alluded to, right? Some of these things, even training, or let's say you go through all that, cannot teach you. And you really have to, as you beautifully said, the difference between the two, a cook and a chef. There's another question, and, with your permission, if both of you would have about 5 minutes, I'd like to extend this. May I just place a question or two more?
Please go ahead, yeah.
Thank you so much. So there is, okay, one moment. Yeah, there is one from Puneet, and this is, again, I keep losing track of the chat box, but which is about how do both of you brave such mind-boggling crisis and handle your own vulnerable moments? And not just today, but in your very, very stellar and what do I say? Learning careers, gone through so much. How do you handle your most vulnerable moments?
Will you take Captain, or should I answer?
Please go ahead, Doctor.
See, first,
medically qualified reply.
Yes, sir. See, let me tell very frankly, quite a lot of people have asked me that, with so much of crises, did you not feel vulnerable? Honestly, every individual will be lying if he says that he never felt vulnerable. When we enter when we talk of, social distancing, and we enter a hospital premises or we enter containment zones, we are vulnerable, and it is a risk. There have been occasions when somebody has crossed us and later we found he is COVID positive. This is one side. Second side is that, when you are suddenly finding yourself helpless. I'll give you an example that, second wave, the vulnerabilities which we personally, what was most depressing for me is the oxygen position in the country. Suddenly you are told that oxygen support from Kerala is not going to come, assured supply, and when you are at the cutting edge level, the vulnerabilities actually mentally you have to be very strong. We have to not create a panic among systems. Suppose I go and say that we have so many hospitals, we may not be able to assure it in time. So we need to quickly develop the backup systems. Backup systems ensure that manifold is ready, secondary auctions are ready, ensure that systems are there, and pray for in the worst moment, pray that something doesn't go wrong. And always mentally we should prepare for the worst. Something definitely goes wrong. Like Chengalpet, despite auction being provided, there was a block and there was leakage. And despite manifold working, few people felt that they died because of lack of, their relatives died because of lack of. You have to face it. You cannot run away, and despite we always say that auction supply may not be an issue, the actual quantity, but actual process was there. To them, we have to be very honest that we cannot question your perception. It may be fact also unless proper inquiry comes. So in most vulnerable moments, I develop my when I really feel very vulnerable. I have 2 or 3 children who have survived corona tsunami. I found a baby which was 3 months old under a bridge. She now continues to live along with another child in Nagapattinam. She is doing BCom and BA respectively, both of them. When I look at them, many times we continue to be in touch. That really inspires them. They have lost everything, but still they have so much belief in there, and they have so much desire to come up. So I feel bad that many of them, when we hear of suicides and other places, mental sickness, we find that there are other examples who can guide us. In vulnerable, if we want to remove vulnerability, we just have to improve coping capacity. It may look a cliché statement, but that is the only way we can approach. And this COVID has created a very big lesson for even states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, which claimed that their public health systems are much better. even we were found out to be vulnerable. So it is a very big lesson that, as and when we find that we have vulnerabilities, we have to keep on updating and improving our coping capacities by balancing it, learning about our vulnerabilities and not closing our eyes like a cat.
Wow. Vulnerability and coping mechanisms. Great. Captain Raghu?
No, I think Dr. Radha has actually enumerated the two key points. One is, of course, the fundamental aspect is there is this famous question asked in war that how can you be brave when you are afraid? Right? But you can be brave only when you are afraid, no? When else can you be brave? So you can be brave only when you are afraid. Otherwise, you cannot be brave. So similarly, I think for a leader to acknowledge that I am vulnerable is also an invitation for getting ideas and thoughts from others. So when a leader says anyone has ideas or, I'm struggling with this, immediately other people will suggest ideas. If the leader comes across as I'm Chaudhary and I know everything, then people will not even profess because they say you got it. You have the answers with you. You have the situation under control. So I think the first is an acknowledgement that leaders are a positional responsibility, the responsibility of a captain or of a secretary of a state or of a CEO of a company or the mother of three kids or that daily laborer who is taking two kids and walking all the way back to Bihar. They are all being given command of a situation because of the lottery of life. And actually, I'm really glad that Dr. Radha brought that point out. But I think anybody who's in this conference right now, 217 people, we belong to 0.00000001% of Indian humanity who were born in the right family, got the right education, got the right breaks, and I think Radha will endorse this. I can also endorse it that there are many kids in his school and my school who were brighter than us, smarter than us, but didn't have the breaks. And he is 7th rank and someone else is probably pulling a rickshaw because they were just born in two different families. So if you were to look at so many planets that are to fall in line for us to be where we are, I don't think we have a right to be, of course, we will feel sad and depressed, but I don't think we have a right to feel that we have got the bad end of life or whatever. I think we are extraordinarily lucky. So just reminding ourselves that despite all of these things happening, how lucky we are, how many planets are to fall in line for us to be where we are, and recognizing that the fundamental responsibility of a leader is to provide inspiration. And you may not have the answer, but you have to provide inspiration. You have to create an environment where that inspirational answer can come. And that, if you are able to do, my sense is that itself will give you strength. Acknowledging that I need strength will give you strength.
Brilliant. And I think this has just completely brought everything together in saying that I think the system can create these leaders, and these leaders have some of these traits, which is about holding vulnerability, playing to it as a strength, not sort of, fear may be there, but I think that's an opportunity to be brave. And I think more than anything else, feeling that sense of privilege that you're absolutely right. Sitting here on a platform, we have a computer, we have a phone, we're able to connect like this and even dialogue when millions out there are fighting their battles. So I just hope leaders, coaches, everyone listening in here today, I think we can create a society where we have more people like Dr. Radhakrishnan and Captain Raghu, and I think all of us collectively need to contribute to this. On that note, I'm aware we've gone over by 8 minutes, and I know both of you are very busy. I did negotiate with you only for a certain amount of time. So thank you for that generosity. And my apologies to everyone in the chat box if your questions haven't been covered. But honestly, I don't know. I hope I've done some justice to collate it together and bring it out. But hopefully this is not the last occasion where we will meet you. Gratitude from the ICF family, and my gratitude also to our session sponsor and gold sponsor, Saint Gobain, who's made this session possible, and to each one of the 200 plus participants who are here today, who have indeed made this dialogue and held a lovely space for all of us. Any closing remarks, Dr. Radhakrishnan and Captain Raghu, before we wind off?
No, I just would like to thank and tell everybody that, each one of us is really a unique person. We should ensure that, we are able to contribute to the best. And my only request to everybody is that, we are becoming more and more cynical. A lot of negativity is around. We need to fight the negativity. India being a democracy, it is such a wonderful, when you look at many other countries, we have had an opportunity to interact with many people. We are in a wonderful place where we can really become flowers from buds. So this is where we need to fight cynicism, be part of the problems, and then find solutions. Wonderful to be with the entire team. Captain Raghu Raman, excellent to hear your speech. Vijaya, madam, appreciate your persistence and the entire initial part of your program also as part of it. And thanks to all the participants. Keep in touch. Best wishes to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. I don't want to take any more time of yours. It's been a wonderful to interact with both you and Dr. Radha. You may know Dr. Radha. Actually, he must be your senior, Mr. Siddiq, who was at one time PS to Mr. Chidambaram. He was a very close colleague of mine when I was in the government. So I have fond memories of Tamil Nadu Cadre also. So thank you very much for being in this panel, and it was a great session. And I know that we didn't have enough time, so I put my Twitter handle here @CapRaman. If you have any question, anyone has any other question, you might want to tweet me there, because I check my Twitter more often than I check my mail. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you.
On that happy note, I would like to salute both of you for making this possible, and to the service that you're doing by just being yourselves. And this is what I call embodied leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be taking a short break now, but there is speed networking. You don't know who you could meet, beautiful connections and possibilities. And then we have coaching roundtables that start at 2 for some amazing topics. You must join us. And then, of course, we get back to our session, which is at 3:30, again, on some very interesting topics. So I do hope ICF India Conclave 2021 is going great for all of you. Enjoy this, learn, feel inspired, and celebrate the spirit of coaching and growth. With that, I sign off for this session. Bye-bye.